So you've got your pepper plants in the ground. You've had them in the garden all summer long. They look beautiful. They've produced incredibly well, but you want them to do even a little bit better. How do you do that? Take them indoors. It's a super simple process, and today I'm going to show you how to do it. And with any luck, you can have pepper plants indoors that are going to be growing, ready to go outdoors in the spring, not only sooner, but bigger. Let's go. All right, so the first thing to remember when it comes to transplanting your peppers and taking them indoors is that all of this beautiful foliage is going to have to go. Now, that hurts to say, but it is the reality. There's no way that this pepper plant can sustain all of this foliage indoors. It's just not possible. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove all the fruit. Whether it's immature or not, you might as well take it inside and eat it. Now, we're doing this at the very end of the season. The reason why is because any peppers that could produce, I want them to produce because they're doing well in the garden. And it's not a guarantee that taking your plants indoors is going to result in survival. You're going to lose a fair amount of them. And that's because you're going to do a lot of damage to them. They're going to undergo a lot of stress. But what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to offset that stress by taking a few steps. So the first thing is we're going to reduce how much fruit is on the plant because it can't hold on to it anyways. Even if you took it indoors, it would most likely drop it along with all the leaves and then it would die. So we're gonna take our harvest, we're gonna set that aside. So the next thing when taking pepper plants indoors is picking the right time. Now there's a fine line between too early when your plants are still thriving and you want them in your garden and too late when they're dead. Now the ideal time for me, the sweet spot I find is about 3 weeks before my first frost date. I also look for a few signs. I look for the plant still flowering, right? That means that it's still healthy and it's healthy enough to want to sustain fruit. So that's a good sign. I also look for no discolored leaves. The leaves are not turning yellow, they're not falling off the plant. The plant is holding on to those leaves and even producing some new leaves. That's another sign you want to look for. You ideally want to move a healthy plant indoors. If the plant is not healthy, it has a very low survival rate. And the reason why, again, is we're going to put it through a lot of stress. So if it's already going through stress, that's not great. So while we want to move it in a time when it's cool in the morning, right? Not super hot. We don't want it like 80, 85 degrees. Heat is a stress. We want less stress. I also want to move it after I've really watered. You don't want to move it dry because dry soil is a stress, right? So we just had a lot of rain yesterday. It's a great time to do this. It's cool. It's not very sunny out, and it's also still growing and still flowering. That's the best time and the best type of plant you want to move indoors. Next, we're going to talk about pruning. All right, so next we're going to talk about pruning. Now this is by far the most painful for us to have to do, but it's really important. If we're going to ensure the survival of this pepper plant indoors, you gotta prune, and you have to prune very aggressively. We're going to take about 80 to 90% of this plant off. It's going to sound insane, but we're pulling out the big guns. So we're basically coming in here, and we're coming in and we're finding basically any branch, and we're chopping that branch completely back. We want very little foliage. Any other little growth down here, we're pulling all that off. Any flowering, we're pulling all that off. We're taking all of that completely off, and we want just basically a few stumps. So if you can see this, check this out. Like there is hardly any foliage. There's not even really leaves on this plant. It's basically just sticks. And that's actually what we're looking for. You really don't want all that much because leaves actually invite things like pests. You'll invite things like spider mites. You'll invite things like aphids. So any leaves we're taking off as well. Leaves can be basically a place for pests to host, right? And we don't want pests indoors. So we're taking any leaves off. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna dig this plant up, and we are going to essentially practice the art of bonsai, which is the act of essentially making little miniature plants. We're gonna take this giant plant and we're gonna make it miniature, and how we do that is by greatly reducing the root ball. I've just come in here and completely severed all of these roots, and I'm also gonna shake off any excess soil, because what we're gonna do is we're gonna make sure that this root ball right here can fit inside of our pot that we're gonna use. Now you don't wanna go with a really big pot, which is what we'll talk about. You wanna go with a small root ball and very little foliage up top. Here's why. The reason why is because there's a direct correlation to how much foliage can be sustained by the root system down below. If your root system is really large, it's going to encourage lots of top growth. We don't want that. So what we're doing is we're essentially restricting the amount of growth it can have up top by also reducing how much roots are down below. That's going to keep the plant from overstressing, because this was very traumatic. This was very traumatic. Moving it indoors was very traumatic. But if we can get it to go through a rest period where it just kind of stays chill all winter long, it stays cool, doesn't really grow a whole lot, but it stays healthy, these are actually going to start to bud in the spring. You're going to start to have new growth, and then by the time you move it outside, the root system won't really matter. It's going to continue to grow and thrive. So you want to have a smaller root ball. It's going to help. Now, you don't want this to be completely bare. You only want, I would say, I don't know, a good fist size of roots. Any more than that, it's too much roots. All right, so here's a good size reference. I take this little half-gallon pot here. The roots should be able to fit pretty snugly within a half-gallon pot. You can go up to a 1-gallon pot if you want. I find that in my circumstances, I've had better survival in a half-gallon pot than a 1-gallon pot. The more soil you have, the more moisture there's going to be, the more encouragement there's going to be for more root development, and that can cause stress. So I typically find a half-gallon works. I can also up pot later, right? You can always move to a larger pot if you need to, if it's showing signs of that, but I'd rather start in a small pot, move to a larger pot later, than start in a large pot and regret it. So we're gonna do this again. We're gonna be taking out these Joe Parker peppers, these New Mex Joe Parker peppers, some of my favorite peppers of the year. These were awesome and they were so delicious, but we're gonna take off all that foliage, remove all of that. Seems painful, but you gotta do it. Coming in here, taking off all the leaves, any growth. Alrighty, then we're gonna take the plant, we're gonna dig it up. This is not a long process. Very, very simple to do, but it's important you do it right. All right, there's your root ball. Knock off all that soil. You're gonna put it in fresh soil. You just wanna make sure you don't have a whole lot of roots hanging off. And this also gives you an opportunity to take off all those places for pests to live as well. All right, so next we're gonna take some soil. I'm just gonna use this compost from our other bed, and you can use some bagged soil. That works out really great as well if you've got it on hand. I don't have it on hand, but I've also not had a problem with compost either. The biggest thing when taking compost indoors is you do have a chance of bringing in creepy crawlies, things like worms, slugs, spiders, ants, all can hitch a ride on that compost, which is one of the nice things about bagged soil. You don't have to worry too much about things like spider mites, things like aphids coming in on compost. You will have a chance also of things like fungus gnats, but if you know how to properly control soil moisture and you also know kind of what to look for, fungus gnats are not a big problem and they're pretty easy to eradicate. So I don't worry too much about it. Also, you can take this compost, you can heat it up in the oven, 350 degrees for 5 minutes, super simple to do, and that'll sterilize the compost. But you do lose a lot of those beneficial bacteria and fungi as well because you're sterilizing. So once you get the compost in here, pack it around, kind of stabilize that plant, the next thing is moving it indoors. And this is a really simple process, and a lot of people overthink this process and end up messing it up. They give their plant conditions that a normal full-growing plant would want. I see a lot of people throwing it underneath the most powerful grow lights possible. You really don't need that. What you need are nice, cool conditions. Cool conditions would be something around 55 to around maybe 65 degrees. That is going to give it a nice, cool growing condition where it's going to grow very slowly. You do not want very hot, very arid, like normal growing conditions, because it's going to cause the plant to want to grow very fast, and it can't and it shouldn't grow that fast. The next thing is lighting. When it comes to lighting, you want to put it underneath, yes, a grow light, yes, that's very important, or a very bright window, that's great, but it doesn't need a ton of that light. I just put it underneath one of our grow lights at half strength. We have multiple bulbs you can turn off and on. 8 bulbs, I turn it down to 4 bulbs, and that gives it enough light to where it wouldn't thrive normally, but it keeps it alive, and that's important. You don't want this thing getting massive and bushy because it can't sustain that through winter. It's just not going to do well. The next thing and the final thing that we do is we make sure to regulate the humidity. It is so vital that you give it humidity. If it gets in a very dry environment next to like a heater or like a drafty window, it's going to very much dry out the foliage and it's going to dehydrate and drop the leaves. So I make sure that I have it in a room that's going to be right around 60–65% humidity or so. It is a little bit humid, yes. I don't typically go any lower than 45% humidity. Any lower than 40–45%, you're getting into that range where it's quite dry and you're risking the plant dropping its leaves. So I will typically put it in my grow room, which has a humidifier in it, or I put it in a room that's just not next to like any really dry sources, right? If you heat your house with wood, make sure you put a humidifier in or like a pan of water near the plant, so it's going to have some of that humidity near the plant and it's not going to dry out. But other than that, all you have to do is essentially just keep it alive, keep it healthy. It's going to stay green like this. It may want to leaf out a little bit, and that's fine. The only thing you don't want it to do is flower. If it starts to flower, all those flowers are going to get picked off. You don't want any flowers forming until spring. Once you get it moved outside, that's when it can flower, and that's when it's going to do great. The only final thing I was going to mention is transplanting. When it comes to transplanting, and fertilizing. When it comes to transplanting, I'm not going to transplant this unless it absolutely needs it. And what I look for is signs of stress. If the roots start coiling around the bottom, it starts popping out the bottom, starts getting pot bound, I will transplant into like a 1-gallon pot. And then fertilizing, you don't want to fertilize this. You do not want to over fertilize because that's going to cause lots of growth. And remember, you don't want lots of growth. You want this plant to just stay chill like this, minimal growth. So we're just getting this last pepper potted up here. And I got a couple other things I kind of forgot when we turned the camera off. The first thing is how deeply you want to transplant this in this pot. You want it just the same level that it was in the garden. Not a whole lot more than that, otherwise you're going to risk stem rot. So keep the soil level just as it was in the garden. And then finally, we're going to talk about what happens if there are pests. So if there are pests, things like aphids or spider mites may come on your plant. Use a really good insecticidal soap. I find neem oil in combination with like a Dr. Bronner's soap works super well at keeping off any pests. Also, keep your pets away from your plants because pets are hosts for pests. I know it sounds bad to say, but cats and dogs are hosts for things like spider mites. They go outside, they roll around, they pick them up in their fur and their hair, and they bring them inside, they brush up against your plants. You will absolutely get spider mites from your pets. People often wonder where they come from. Sadly, that's where they come from. All right, fun fact for you guys. Did you know that peppers are actually tropical perennials? They are not supposed to die. Now, we grow them here in Michigan as an annual, but they can be grown as a perennial, and that's why we're taking them indoors. These plants are native to South America, where they grow perennially all the time. They don't actually die. And in the right environment, under the right care, they can easily get 15 to 20 feet tall. That's right. With the right type of support and right growing conditions, 15 to 20 feet tall is not uncommon. So absolutely crazy, super cool, and I really hope that you try this. If you did, and you've tried this in the past and it's worked really well for you, let me know in the comments box down below. If you thought this video was fun and interesting, make sure to give it a like. If you learned something, make sure to give it a like. And if you haven't subscribed, make sure to do that. Hit that subscribe button, and we'll catch you all on the next episode. All right, see ya. Grow bigger. Bye.